Morgan York folks, you won't be surprised to know that we've been sitting here for a week and anxiously waiting to much a fannacht or an desperate fwy na cansiana Gerard. So I'm going to invite in whoever just wants to jump in. We're all the stops and starts, all the ups and downs, all the cul-de-sacs and so on. So eventually, Sinn Féin is in castle buildings outside Stormont. So just give us your reflections. We don't need to go through all the detail of the negotiations. That's been well covered. But just your sense of it, your reflections.
Well, even atmosphere to bhí mise díreach ra bhí sin mar bhúntear a scoilán Gaeilge a bhí lonahans and culturala ag an am.
Yeah, Kevin Notion, the Fergus.
Yeah. So, Manscoil Ferriston mar a bhí agus Coliste Ferriston is. So, bhí sin másca idir Fair agus Mara ar an Erin agus Bógaí agus Colony. Nya warmalcha glé na páistí ar na múnseirí le céad aim agus Gaeilge an teanga na scoile. So it was very much, this lively Irish-speaking, mixed male-female, very informal atmosphere that I was living my life in, smack in the middle of the local community, and went from there into castle buildings, the coldest, iciest, sterile, overwhelmingly male, overwhelmingly British. You just could not find a bigger contrast from the atmosphere that I had left to the atmosphere that I found myself in there. Notwithstanding the fact that we went in as part of a big, a big group, and there were lots of others there from other parties, but the overwhelmingly male really was very striking as well. And I know there's a lot of talk around the anniversary about the role of the Women's Coalition and fair play to the Women's Coalition, but I think fair play to our people as well that always insisted on having trying to get gender balance and geographical balance where they could within the delegations, regardless of where they went. Clearly people were there because of their abilities and because of what they had to offer to bring to the table, but Sinn Féin never at any stage thought that all came as male, but that wasn't what I found from some of the other groups when I went in there.
And did everybody talk to you? And the Sinn Féin team? Did anybody talk to you? Did everybody talk to you in terms of... Even after the Good Friday Agreement, when I was an MLA, I remember there was certainly the unionists would try and push up aside, even in the midst of Parliament buildings that we were in by then. There was one woman, very well known MLA from the UUP, walking down the corridor, and she kept looking at the wall as she was walking past. And I also remember, and that, as I say, we were in the assembly by then. The way there are two parts to the coffee bar, and the DUP used to take up every single table in one part of the coffee bar, so we'd have to take our coffee and go into the other half. Until one day, I don't even know why I was getting a coffee. I was going, and I suddenly thought, and there was a spare seat at the table. I said, "Do you mind if I join you?" I said, "You never saw such a scattering of the UPs." So that was long after. So when we went into the talks, first, no, not everybody. Yeah, and not everybody talked to us. If I recollect properly, the DUP left as we were done, am I right? With the DUP, did they stick in for a while, or did they?
There were 70 texts throughout, and you remember after the agreement, even sort of took them some considerable time to engage. you know, and even things like the Washington conference that Clinton organised, where they were, remember the big gala event, and they were parked outside in the corridor eating sandwiches. I mean, all of that, you know, as if it was going to, who were they representing, you know, really, and what did they expect to be the outcome?
But it's worth remembering that they did go to South Africa.
And demanded 2 buses.
It was David Trimble was the key person in it. I'm only saying that because they went to South Africa, and as it happens, Jeffrey Danielson was one of the ones that went. Peter Robinson, from what I was told at the time, I think that Ian Paisley just decided not to go, and it was Peter Robinson who decided to go. And of course that was set up, that was in 97, so it was in the middle of all of this, and that was set up to sort of try and build relationships. It was actually a South African who hosted it, of course, and all of that. And what Bairbre describes went on for years. I mean, years after the institutions were set up, people would walk past me, it was just me, and look at the wall. In fact, I could still name somebody who still does it. It's more connected to TUV, but did that for years. There, it was that sort of like untouchable stuff. But there was a lessons for them then as well, and they went over. They refused to travel in the same transport, but it was all of unionism. But it was David Trimble who led it. I have to say, he was the largest part of it.
Just let me get you back into this.
Well, going in, my memory of going into the talks, sort of nearly in a personal way, I felt a considerable confidence along with a great nervousness. So the considerable confidence to me was that we had, at that stage, quite a large team. And it was starting to break as we went into negotiations, obviously, when we eventually started getting into different sections of what might turn out to be the thing, maybe prisoners, maybe policemen, it might have been Bill of Rights, it could be all sorts of things, the institutions themselves and all of that, once we got that. But before that, we had a big team. There was discussions, there was always pre-meetings before you went in to talk to anybody. So you went in with that type of confidence, but there was always a nervousness, and I think I might have mentioned it last week, but it was around, in my head, you know, these people are professionals, and I found out very quickly that they're not. That the strength that we had was that we actually had a vision, that we knew where we were going, that we had strategic objectives, what is, as often I think ourselves, Gerry, has called it, a roadmap. So we knew where we were going. But there was always, I think it was always, when you're going in there and you have all the stuff behind you, you know, you're in there representing, you know, an historical bid to have reunification of your country, then that's a huge thing. I don't want to describe it as a burden, because it wasn't a burden, but it's certainly in your mind. And Gerry, if I could quote him, I remember saying on a number of occasions that when he went into a negotiation, he always had the Patriot dead in his mind. You know, that you were there representing people who couldn't be there, and representing the wider population who, you know, they had trusted us. And I meant to say this a wee bit earlier, but it's also worth remembering the forum elections, which to my memory, and correct me if my analysis of this was wrong, but we already had a negotiating team. I think it was Paddy Mayhew, and I think that's early before the Labour came in. And in my opinion, wanted to stall it, and they started bringing up these barriers, and one of them was, you need to be democratically elected to be negotiators. So we were getting elected as negotiators. At which point, Jay asked me to go over to North Belfast, and
the rest is just...
and other people were, because we were looking negotiators, so we were going into wherever we thought we would have the strength to do that, and we could have fought for it over 6 months or a year, but the decision was, no, we want an election, let's have an election, and we went in. And we saw the type of support we had, and although they meant it as a negative, I thought it turned into quite a positive thing because of the mandate we got.
Well, a lot of the meetings that were had even at that stage were bilateral meetings. I mean, not every meeting was a meeting of all of the parties in it. But I do remember a meeting. Couldn't tell you the date now, but it was a meeting. The DUP were there and the Unionists were there, at the Loyalists. And the Loyalists, one of the things that I remember very much from David Irvine was giving out really strongly about things that the DUP in particular, but the top of society unionists had said and had, in his view, wound them up as young people to go out and do things, which the others then stood back and said, oh, it's nothing to do with us. And they came very much with that sense in mind, I thought, the Loyalists did. I thought, so that they had this different sense of themselves. But they did come in with the unionist leadership, and they came in stating that their mandate was the silence of the guns, which wasn't our mandate, as Gerry said, was different. We came with a vision, we came with a negotiating position, we came with a mandate. They, for all that the unionists always put up to us, and tried to diminish the political nature of our delegation, they never even claimed that the Loyalists were coming in on any other basis other than that they said.
What I found was there was no problem whatsoever. Gary McLaughlin, whose father was killed by the IRA, first time, stuck his hand out, shook hands. You know, the rest of them, Spence, all the rest of them, David Irvine, of all of them, I'm not going to name all the names, where these other folks were actually in the room, or as you said, replacing.
No, they were.
I always put that down to nearly a working class sort of a dimension.
I also
different.
think they were combatants.
Yeah.
And the combatants, they knew what to be involved in a conflict meant. So when they talked about big house unionism, what they were basically saying is, you just didn't suffer. And you're right, it's working class, but it's also that they themselves were involved in the conflict and had more of a stake and seen themselves as having more of a legitimate stake to be there than unionism, I think.
I certainly got that sense from them, and certainly none of them were ever anything but pleasant with me, although I did find that the UDA ones, they went through periods where they would still talk to you, but it was on the staircase. There was definitely a fear among them at one stage of being seen talking to you. Yeah. But there was never that. In general terms, I thought from day one they were different. The other part of the negotiations, I suppose, that I remember, because I was in the privilege to be with Martin on the business committee of the negotiations, which was the committee that decided what was up for conversation, what the topics were going to be, when they would be debated, if they would be debated, how they would be debated, and we had been warned in advance that was where you needed to watch out, because the people who controlled that could in many ways control the way the negotiations went. So, part of that was, again, it was like the talks in general. It had an international chair. So that was the Shastalin, and it was George Mitchell that chaired overall, and that definitely made a difference to our people, knowing that was the case. But it had a joint Irish government and British government note taker, and I took copious notes for us, as is my wont. But we would then go back in, and there were times when you'd find the person from the British side saying, "Now, we decided last week that we wouldn't deal with," and I'm going, "Excuse me, we didn't decide anything of the sort," and you would be able to then reel off exactly what had been said, and would go back on that. But so that was very much there. But it was important to us. You remember the atmosphere of the Canadians arriving with their Dunkin' Donuts. I never worked out whether that was just homesickness or whether they had heard about how people could be brought low by certain mechanisms that wouldn't allow them to do their duty on the day. But they were always there, and between that and George Mitchell, you did have that sense that you were going to get a bit more of a fair hearing. And Martin, of course, was always, as Martin was even afterwards in the executive, very laid back in his approach, very gentle, but never letting anything be put across him. And saying, oh yes, and would listen, but had his point to make, and was just amazing as a chief negotiator, senior negotiator.
And Mitchell, what's your recollection of Mitchell? Hello?
Well, he was absolutely essential to the whole process, and he did, I think, impose some sense of procedure and how the various contributions, which very often could descend into shouting matches. He always had an ability to bring the conversation back to the subject matter, and none of the parties or their delegates could complain that they weren't given the opportunity to make their point. But George Mitchell was quite capable of pointing out that they had, perhaps given a certain individual ample opportunity to say what they wanted to say, but they didn't say it, and that was their responsibility. And he was in a sense imposing a set of rules on negotiation. Not everybody was in there for a negotiation. They were in there to make points and point the finger. What I found was an interesting dynamic was that relationships between ourselves and the loyalist delegations started to develop during the negotiations, to the extent that on a very important matter, where Martin, at our behest, because we had a system of checking against the our list of issues, and a particular issue was the prisoner release process, and it was very controversial, obviously. And the unionists were adamant. The DUP weren't even there, but you could tell that they would have been even worse. But on the prisoners issue, Davy Irvine would have advised you about how far you could push before you would drive David Trimble out of the talks, and if he left the talks, then the talks essentially were over. And Martin had developed sufficient of a rapport there to get into guidance in that. Although, he was still at 4 o'clock in the morning of the agreement, he was still running up and down the corridor.
One of the things you couldn't forget, though, was that while all of this was going on, our people were still being killed outside in that late 97, 98 period. There were people, overall there were people still dying on the streets, and the likes of Martin in particular, and yourself. East Belfast is somewhere people will happily go today, but it was not somewhere to be heading into and out of in the early hours of the morning at that time. So the negotiators were also putting their lives on the line, coming and going, and particularly those who had long journeys home afterwards. And people outside on the streets were still putting their lives on the line in terms of their vulnerability from people who wanted to bring the thing down and who didn't want it to happen.
There's an interesting element to this which we sometimes forget, is that a security team was put together. So people had to be, as you say, got up and down to, and then later on, and or maybe before this, in terms of the councils, when with the same, and I know you're making your point when you say our people, you mean all of the people who were killed.
Oh,
but,
yeah.
In the middle of all of that, there were 22 Sinn Féin members killed and 4 family members. But I remember a funny thing that happened. One of the first times that our team went up, Cleaky Clark had been given responsibility, but no resources to look after people. But anyway, when they were ready to go up, he gave the security team these little microphones that you put down your sleeve. You know, they were type of things you see FBI agents using when they talk into their sleeves. And God rest McLaughlin, he said to him, sure, there's no batteries, there's nothing else. Actually, he said, nobody else knows that. Just talk into it. And interestingly enough, that was the news item on the news that evening. It was nearly as significant as that Sinn Féin in the talks. It was that their security team were talking into their sleeves.
Just on George Mitchell, one of the things that I remember coming up is, and I was at it, so I think it was yourself, myself, and one or two others. We were around sort of complaining to him, you know, that this isn't right and that isn't right and the other thing isn't right, and you know, because of things which have been said, and it's nothing to do with negotiations. He says, if I was here to do what was right, he says, I'd have a different job. He says, I'm here to try and bring us together and make a decision. And I thought it always stuck with me. I thought it was, you know, and he just said it like didn't have to think about it. Just said it. Like, you know.
I remember clearly what he actually said was, I would have had a different brief. That was exactly what he said. Now, I know you're all excited talking about all of this. What was your sense, and as few words as you can muster, when the agreement is made? We're going back to the Ardash. We had an Ardash which was adjourned. Because you're all piling out. There's banks of TV, media folks. You all do what you do with those. And then you're heading home on the long road up to Bairbre Pass with Martin McGuinness and whoever else was there from Derry, and heading back into Belfast and all the other comrades from Tyrone and Dublin and everywhere else. What was your thoughts just as individuals, just if you can remember, as you sallied, whatever time it was must have been probably quite late on Good Friday, or maybe when you woke up on Easter Saturday, what was your thoughts?
I was disappointed, and it's not disappointed that we had reached agreement. And it seems strange to say it, and it seems amazing to say it now, and we're constantly trying to defend the Good Friday Agreement. But there were still more bits that I would have liked to see in there. Yeah, and there was that sense that had we had more political strength at the time, there were other things that we could have got into that. Had we had less political strength at the time, we wouldn't have managed to get what we got as a peaceful way forward. But I suppose the heart sinking of seeing bits that never made it across the line gave way then to the pride of what we had managed, and that was then tempered when we went through the discussions with people as to what had been achieved. But there was a mixture in my heart at the time.
Okay, Gerry.
Well, it's probably a bit less analytical, but it near enough articulates it. I thought there was a great relief that we had, and I felt we had achieved something. We had achieved something great, but it was a document which wasn't long, right? So implementation, you know, how does this go into, and selling it. I suppose selling it was a big thing. So it was going out, okay, we've got the war. I seen the jubilation. I remember looking at the jubilation around the SDLP and all that there, and I didn't feel that way. And I just remember, I just thought it was, they must know more than I know, because we had this agreement, but where was it going to bring us? So I was delighted to have it, but got into the detail and then got out and talking with people. To me, that was the next task. And in a way, that had been the task the whole way through, because we did take up what the South Africans said. We did do a lot of talking to our people, and while we couldn't tell them every, tittle and jot, every wee issue, we let them know where we were going, and I thought we were doing well. At times it was difficult. Policing was big, and I worried about policing, because policing hadn't been resolved. And that's another story, but I mean, which
well, if you'll recall that we had stated that it was an issue we didn't want.
No, that's right, yeah.
We wanted it to go into commission.
And it's jumping ahead, but I mean, giving it out to an international group was the right way to move, was the right concept, all of that. But then we worried about who was going to be on the international group and who would pick them and all of that there. So that sort of Republican caution after so many years of struggle, I think just stayed with us. As it turned out, the 175 recommendations that came in certainly took me by surprise, and because they were far-reaching and it was reform. And I do remember talking to Tom Constantine, I think, who ended up the oversight, saying, and he was a top cop in America, and he said, I had to give him and would still give my right arm to have a patent report in Boston.
And I suppose caution and lack of elation is a better way of describing than disappointment, what I felt on the day. It was a lack of elation and a knowledge that it was taking us where we wanted to go, but that it hadn't taken us there.
Yeah. Okay. And Mitchell, your personal
You'll remember that I was doing the media briefings, particularly as we were coming up to the conclusion of it, or the deadline that George Mitchell had set. And I was sent out at about 7 o'clock the night before to just dampen down expectations, and which I duly did. And then back in again for the last run, working your way through the checklist and whatever. And at some stage, I haven't a clue what the time was, but I suspect, because I know how late Martin was running up and down the corridor, so it was around about 4 o'clock in the morning. We had decided that we'd achieved as much as we could, including on the prisoner release thing, which was crucially important in terms of going back to our base. And so it went to bed for a couple of hours sleep, and then out at 7 o'clock in the morning to indicate that we thought we had the basis of a deal. Now, the background to that, which I wasn't aware of and told subsequently, is that the government parties were starting to parcel up and move on the basis that it wasn't going to work this time. This was after, remember the silhouetted, joyous kind of cheering on the SDLP. This was 2 days after it. So there was the downer where we were indicating, it was the first time it really dawned on me just how central we had become. Because at one stage people were treating us as if we needed to be taken by the hand. And that kind of, the press conference, which, me and Jim Gibney went out, it took about 5 minutes and went back in again. The whole place was just electric. The game was on. So it wasn't my idea that whoever it was, I can't remember who decided that we would do it in that particular way, but it was a masterstroke in bringing and helping George Mitchell to bring the conclusion to a successful end. Or the whole kind of process a successful conclusion. I do think as time went on over, there probably would have been return engagements, there's no doubt about it, because progress had been made sufficiently to justify that. But that actually allowed it to be wrapped up, and then after that it was a matter of just gaining vigilance about what the two governments would do and should do in the context of the agreement. It's also interesting that press conference probably precipitated Jeffrey's walking out of the process. We didn't lose Trimble, but we lost Dance.
And Arlene Foster.
And did you travel back with Martin? What's your reflection on that?
It was completely and absolutely exhausted, so there wasn't a whole lot of conversation. But I mean, we both agreed that we had got as much out of it as we were entitled to expect. I think time showed that we actually got more out of it than we thought. And we got plenty to build on.
Okay, well, just to give my own sort of just very general observations as we come to the conclusion of this discussion. And we had a very, as I've said it a few times, we had a very large team. And everybody was designated a role. And we had to, some degree, perfect it the way we did negotiations and how we held each other accountable and how we checklisted and how we scrutinised and verified documents, and also you had to deal with the public, you had to deal with the media. So we had a very, may say so, an efficient group of people. We had our strategic objectives. one of the big things we wanted to get rid of, and it was us who did it wasn't anybody else, was to get rid of the Government of Ireland Act and to have this principle of self-determination where the people will have their say, the referendum contained within the agreement. And, you know, there have been references made to the Downing Street Declaration. Now, had we agreed to the Downing Street Declaration, it would have never been a Good Friday Agreement. So we did right by that. And then some folks would compare the Good Friday Agreement with the Sunningdale Agreement. You know, Sunningdale Agreement didn't mention equality once.
Self-determination, that's right.
Didn't mention it once. And yet it's you know, threaded through. Now, as always, and George Mitchell said this to myself and Martin, that's the easy bit when it was over. The hard bit will be
Implementation, yeah.
So we may come back, depending on your time and my patience, to discuss the period from the agreement was agreed to now and where we're at. I think everybody that we were working with worked extremely well and worked extremely hard. And, you know, it was super to be working with Martin McGuinness, but it was also super to be working with the entire team. Arguably, we couldn't have done it without Martin, but we also couldn't have done it without yourselves and all the other people who are not represented in this discussion today. So, fair play. And we're not there yet. You know, Barbara was talking earlier about being a wee bit deflated. But we knew what to do. We knew that this wasn't the settlement. We said so. We knew we had another run of the road to do. So thanks for all that you do. And maybe just to finish up, if there are reflections about some of the comrades who never get a mention, or indeed some of the other folks, because obviously the agreement, well, I've said a few times, this is a very Sinn Féin focused thing. The agreement took all of the parties who agreed to it to agree to it, as well as the chairperson and Taoiseach and the British Prime Minister as well, and our friends in America. And that last night that you were talking about, when Bill Clinton was on the phone, at least 3 times to me, and one can presume he was on the phone to David Trimble and to all the rest of them, particularly the Taoiseach and the British Prime Minister. So just to finish, we'll give you the last word, Barbara. So we'll invite Gerry to come in then, Mitchell, and then we'll give you a fucking score so you can be reflecting.
Well, the abiding view or thing that sticks with me, which goes right up till today, is I thought at the time naively that was the negotiation done. And I've spent the rest of my life, along with yourselves and other people who managed to inveigle into it, negotiating. And I mean, there's the obvious, 2007, which was the St Andrews Agreement. There's the justice transfer of policing and justice in 2000, and the Hillsborough Agreement. We've had the Stormont House Agreement on legacy, which has now been destroyed by the Brits. You have all of that, but I mean, that was the lesson. I learned it fairly quickly after it, but I never thought I'd still be at it as we are today. The other thing, the last thing I would say, and I think it's been mentioned a few times, there's a Republican belief in inclusivity. And we said that as we went in, because we know what isolation is. We know what people trying to isolate you are. So I remember strongly that we always argued to bring all the parties in. You know, even if they hadn't got a mandate, if they had something that was needed. And I think that stuck by us as well. And also we did it internally. So there's people who haven't been mentioned here, and there's quite a long list of them who were crucial, and some of them actually still in crucial positions in Sinn Féin and indeed in in the Assembly if it ever gets up.
And in the Iraqis.
And in the Iraqis, and very important to say that, because it's now in all Ireland. Then the concentration to a great extent was all seen around the north, because the conflict in that. But you look at where we are now. Then put the Good Friday Agreement into the middle of that, because the Good Friday Agreement was also a liberation process. The cessation of military activity was an empowerment process, which brought and allowed more and more people to come into this, and we are where we are today. And the Good Friday Agreement is huge in the middle of that. There are other things, of course, but I think we're talking about the Good Friday Agreement. I think it's huge.
Okay, Gerry, thank you, Mitchell.
Yeah, I mean, my sense of it is that the Good Friday Agreement has actually enabled us to establish a free and independent democratic republic on the island of Ireland. We've established and won the recognition that the people of Ireland are sovereign. They decide their own future. And it's a question of the modalities of that. Our kind of powerful role now within Irish domestic politics is evidence of the progress that we have made, but we're not there yet. There's still a lot of work to do. The British declaration of no strategic interest is a lot of tosh, because they are looking over their shoulder at Scottish independence when you start to talk about Irish independence. So they've got vested interests and they're running interference, but we are simply getting stronger. Our argument is getting more and more coherent, and I'm more confident than I've ever been in my life that this is going to succeed, and within a generation, in my view.
Okay, Carl. Or I, Barbara.
I will last arrow the bhíon agus bhuaimé sin fiú an lá sin Louis, Gerry and Stalcocras ribh sin agus bí muid jagóní is muoinú fan nídéag séideag ach is lámar sin a bhí an ag an am sin. Bhí sé gcónaí suillear gur tús rud eile ar fad a bheith a gceist. So there was that sense of history, a sense that this was a watershed, this was leading on somewhere. It wasn't clear how or when, and even in the period immediately after that, people talk about the difficulties that were there for the Unionists and for Trimble and for those who walked out. But we went through quite a lot. I mean, before you had the prisoner releases or work around whether it was demilitarisation or prisoner releases or the equality agenda, we went through several months immediately after that where the things that were difficult for us were the things that were being implemented first, and the things that were going to be better for our people were coming more slowly. But even with all of that, it was clear. It was clear that the seeds were there for change, for major change, and things were never, whether in comparison with the time after the hunger strike or the time after 1916, that things were never going to be the same after that day, and it was a privilege to have been part of history that day.
Okay. But Nietzsche Crickna, folks, are in your it was it was a big day, and the process of change had been happening before then. In fact, that was a sign of the changes that had occurred at that time. And the process of change has continued since. So again, Arish, Tumwich, Wake, Deepshire, we may or may not return to look at some of this if you are available to do that. This was never meant to be a sort of a lap of honour, because we have to look not just back at the past, we have to look at the next 25 years and look at what's up the road. We have to live in the future. So thanks again. We live with us, and this is Gerry Adams and Mitchell McLaughlin and Bairbre De Brún and Gerry Kelly saying see you all in another 25 years. Slán